Senators, your agenda states at 3 p.m. we would move to the General File 2007 Committee second priority bills. The first item under that bill is LB 475. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, 475 by Senator Chambers is a bill for an act relating to discrimination. It renames the Nebraska Fair Employment Practice Act. It prohibits discrimination based upon sexual orientation or marital status. Introduced on January 17, referred to the Judiciary Committee. Bill was discussed on May 18. Mr. President, committee amendments were offered. When the legislature left the issue that day, Senator Chambers had pending an amendment to the committee amendments, specifically a floor amendment 116.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Chambers, you're recognized to open on LB 475.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, this amendment itself is of no great consequence. Instead of leaving the name of the act as a part of the amendment, this amendment would strike the name and just put this act. That was for the purpose of having further discussion. The amendment, which is being amended by mine, is what's known as the Catholic Conference or Boys Town Amendment. If you pull it up on your gadget, you will see what it says, and I will not read exactly what that verbiage is, but it is exactly the language that has appeared in this bill every time it has been introduced, except this time. When the bill first was brought several years ago by Senator Tim Hall of South Omaha, who is a Catholic, I told him that there's so much hatred against gay and lesbian people that no senator ought to have his name on that bill alone, so I'm going to co-sponsor it with you. Ever since that day, I have brought this bill repeatedly, and my name generally has been the only one on it as the sponsor. I bring the bill because I see a very great need for it. We have heard stated here. We heard it during committee. You'll hear it in other places where this bill is discussed, that we are giving special minority status to gay and lesbian people. My response is that the state has an obligation, whenever we become aware of a discrete, identifiable group who are being targeted for acts of hatred, which include violence, denial of basic human rights, then the state has the responsibility to provide protection for those people. What this bill is designed to do is provide protection. If you look at the green copy, you will see in various places a listing or a catalog of categories of people who have protection against discrimination in employment. One category relates to marital status, a strictly voluntary arrangement. When you talk about age, how did that get into the non-discrimination portions of the law? White men were encountering problems. They were being terminated because they had reached a certain age. They were not being given employment opportunities in the first instance. They were not being promoted, and in some cases they were being pressured out of their job. So in order to protect older white men, age was put into the law as a category of protected persons. Whenever something impinged upon white people, then the state quickly took steps to protect them. Marriage is something that people choose to enter into. So if people want to talk about a voluntary choice, those kinds of things are already shielded from discrimination in employment. But whether it's a choice or not, when a group of people have been identified and set aside for wrongful treatment, even criminal conduct, the state has an obligation to do something about it. I hear some of the people who cannot bring themselves to simply stand on the floor and say they hate gay and lesbian people, to put up the notion that somehow business people are being harmed, that business people's hands are tied. Well, I think that Senator Ingle was out of step when he tried to speak for business people. I don't know if Senator Fulton did or not. He was just against gay and lesbian people, period. But if you look at the committee statement, you don't see a business person who spoke against this bill. Not one business person, not the Chamber of Commerce, no organization of those that are being so vociferously defended on this floor spoke against the bill. So if they didn't feel their rights or their interests as employers are being infringed or impinged upon by this bill, why should these people on the floor of the legislature do that? Because they need a cover. They're trying to hide behind a straw person. This bill, I think, is one of the most significant things that we can do as a legislature. The other day, my good friend, my good young friend, half my age, Senator Fulton, was very upset about some group called the North American Male and Boy Association or something, because these are grown men feeling they have the right to have sexual relationships with underage boys. And he expressed a kind of indignation that probably all of us feel. However, he didn't go far enough. He didn't talk about the large number of Catholic priests who are doing this. Large numbers. And one of those, Senator Fulton, who wore a red hat, who was an archbishop and presided over one of the worst cases of child molestation in the country by Catholic priests. You know what his name was? His last name should have been Lawless. Bernard Cardinal Law. And you know what the Catholic Church did for him when he was shown not only to have known about these problems, but have sat back silently while these rats were transferred to dioceses around the country, and no diocese was notified that you are being set upon by a known predator. The Catholic hierarchy is sending him and did not warn the people that your little lambs are going to be set upon by a ravening, predatory wolf. And these were heterosexuals, by the way. So you know what they did to fix Bernard Cardinal Law? They brought him to Rome. They put him over the second most important basilica in Rome. He could not have been lifted or elevated to that position by appropriately discharging the work of a cardinal. He wouldn't have made it. So how did he get it? By presiding over a type of sexual viciousness that would not be tolerated by the mafia or La Cosa Nostra. Worst abuse of young boys by Catholic priests than would be tolerated by organized crime organizations. And courts have begun to hold the Catholic hierarchy responsible because they endorsed, they ratified this misconduct, because upon finding out about it, they didn't take action to correct it, but rather to cover it up and to transfer these predators to other fertile fields for their predation.
1 minute.
So Senator Fulton did not go far enough. Maybe it's because he's a Catholic, and maybe because he operates in a diocese presided over by a bishop who is the only one in the country who will not go along with what the College of Bishops said ought to be done in terms of these men monitoring the activity of priests with reference to whether or not they're abusing children, and that is Bruskowitz. So if we want to get off into that, I am informed and I can do it, but I think we should focus on what this bill is designed to do. And I mention that to show that the arguments being made by some of the people against this bill would more better and more appropriately be made against the hierarchy of their own church. This is a worthwhile bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. I would like to announce that we do have the following guests visiting the legislature today. We have 15 members from the international delegation from Pfizer Animal Health, and they are located in the north balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized? You have heard the opening to LB 475. We will now move to the Judiciary Committee Amendment to AM 399. Senator Ashford, you're recognized.
Just a second, Mr. President, if I might. Okay, I'm sorry, I thought that has not been adopted. I apologize. That's not been adopted? I guess not. The AM 399, I believe, was introduced at the last time we debated the bill, but just to go over it, the amendment exempts from the bill religious organizations and institutions and nonprofits affiliated with religious institutions. This is the amendment that Senator Chambers discussed. The committee felt it to be an appropriate amendment. It was adopted, and I would urge its adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ashford. You have heard the opening. We will move now to Amendment 116, Amendment to Committee Amendment. Senator Chambers.
Mr. President, I'm going to look on my gadget and make sure which one that is, because I think I'm going to withdraw it, but let me be sure.
It would be FA 00116.
I want to withdraw that.
Amendment FA 00116 is withdrawn. We will now return to discussion of the Judiciary Committee Amendment, AM 399. Senators wishing to speak are Senator Ashford, Senator Fulton, Senator Carlson, Senator Shimmick, and Senator Chambers, and Senator Nankus. Senator Ashford.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now that I know where we are, I was going ahead of myself a bit, and I apologize. The last time we discussed this bill, there was a rather lengthy discussion about the definition of sexual orientation, and as we go through these amendments, that I think will be one of the issues that we will be discussing. I have an amendment. Senator Erdman has an amendment that precedes it that defines or modifies the definition in the original bill, the definition of sexual orientation. What is clear, though, is that on this particular amendment is that, and Senator Chambers is right, there was no opposition by any religious organization, or by the Catholic Church certainly, to this bill with the adoption of this amendment. And the discussion about sexual orientation that we had, I believe, on this amendment, though I'm not certain, will come up in later debate on the other amendments. But again, I would urge the adoption of this amendment. It again exempts religious institutions and affiliated nonprofit organizations affiliated with religious institutions from the purview of this bill. And with that, I'd give the remainder of my time to Senator Chambers.
Senator Chambers, about 3 minutes, 35 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Ashford. Members of the legislature, this is the amendment that I touched on, known as the Boys Town Amendment. I do support it. The reason I did not include this language in the bill was for strategic purposes. Had it been included in the bill, the Catholic Conference representative would not have shown up at the hearing. I could not have argued that the mere absence indicates that they have no opposition. So I knew by leaving that amendment out, Mr. Cunningham would come to speak against the bill. He had started into his discussion, and then I read the amendment. I said, Mr. Cunningham, this is the language that ordinarily appears in this bill that you touched on. Then I read it. He said that's exactly what he was going to recommend. I said, if I would persuade the committee to adopt this amendment, would your opposition to the bill go away? He said, yes. We would then have no further interest in opposing the bill. The reason I did it that way was so that some of the new members on the Judiciary Committee could hear Mr. Cunningham state himself that the opposition they had was because that amendment that we're considering now was not a part of the bill. But with its inclusion in the bill, their opposition would go away. I have no objection to including this amendment, and I do support it. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Ashford.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the body. We'll get to have some debate on this issue, and I think you know where my position is. I'm opposed to LB 475. Something that I want to address, Senator Chambers brought up the scandal within the Catholic Church, just the Catholic Church, by the way, with these pedophiles, and we share a disgust there. The way it's been handled has been shameful, and clearly that's a grave injustice, because the serenity and peace of a little child is being disturbed in the worst way. So we have agreement there. But the point that I had made earlier, and that I had tried to articulate, that point still stands. If an individual were to come forward asking for employment who admits that type of inclination, that, in my opinion, disoriented orientation, but says that I abide by the law, I'm not a lawbreaker, but you should know that I have this inclination, I think it would be reasonable to say, well, you shouldn't be working with children. That puts you in a state where you're tempted. And so in that regard, would the passage of LB 475, would an employer be breaking the law if 475 went forward? I don't know for certain. And so I think that's a legitimate question, the definition of sexual orientation. Secondly, a point I'd like to make, whether one is for or against the bill, in my opinion, does not make them hateful or bigoted. We're addressing this by way of policy, and Senator Chambers said that this would be a significant step, and it would be. This would be a significant step forward by way of policy for society to grant protected class status, at least in Nebraska, for the first time, based on one's sexual orientation. So I submit to you something of that gravity ought to have clarity. And with no definition, I would submit that there is not clarity. Now, I reflected on this a little bit this weekend, and I think of some of the people that I've met in this body. I've met all of you in this body, but I've gotten to know some pretty well. John Harms is not a person who hates. Anyone who knows John Harms knows that about him. And he spoke against this bill earlier. Tom Carlson is not a bigot. Anyone who knows him knows that. I'm hopeful that people who have met me recognize that I'm a fairly agreeable person. I don't go crazy and go nuts when I don't get my way. So I hope that I'm hopeful that we can elevate this discourse to the policy at hand. I have strong concerns about this bill, the lack of definition, the policy that we would be setting, the statement we would be making, by law for society. And I'm hopeful that that is the level of discourse that we can have. To the question, not the man. Not ad hominem, but to the question. The points that I had raised earlier, I'll just briefly raise them again. Is there a necessity for this? This is coming by way, a new protected class based on sexual orientation is being introduced within employment law. And the argument would be that those who profess a sexual orientation or who have a sexual orientation who are being discriminated against solely because of that sexual orientation need remedy of law such that they can find employment, a way to make their livelihood. And I submit that what I have seen is that that's not the case. Homosexual households have very high employment income averages. I don't watch TV much anymore, but there's a show called, or maybe it's gone now, Straight Eye, something like that. Straight Eye for the something guy, something like that. Maybe someone will pop up. But, I mean, that's indicative that there's a certain amount of affluence there because there's a certain amount of credibility, I guess, that's granted to the homosexual lifestyle. So, I mean, if we take a look at culture, I don't know that this is something that necessitates...
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Carlson.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, I'm offended by Senator Chambers saying that Senator Fulton hates gays and lesbians. I don't know if he said it about me. He's going to have his chance. But regardless of what he says, Senator Chambers, over a 4-month period, I've grown to really like you. I don't like some of your habits. I don't like some of your stances. I don't like some of your thoughts, but I like you, and that's not going to change. I have friends that are gays and lesbians. I don't agree with their lifestyle. I don't agree with some habits, but I like them as friends. In our society, our set of values, as I thought about LB 475 in the last couple of days, I asked a question of some senators. What's the purpose of sex? Number 1, procreation. Number 2, recreation, pleasure, in marriage. And I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. I don't think there are any other good, acceptable reasons for indulging in sex. Senator Chambers, you said the other day, what goes on in someone's bedroom is nobody else's business. I agree, and it shouldn't be shared with anyone. What goes on in one's house or apartment is nobody else's business. I agree, and it shouldn't be shared with anyone. What goes on in my bedroom with me and my wife is no one's business, and I have no business sharing it with anyone. But that's not really what LB 475 is about, keeping everything private. Now, concerning the bedroom or the home, to use Senator Chambers' words, I don't think that we should unleash such things on the unsuspecting public. Now, I don't know Senator Chambers' heart. I hear what comes out of his head. And sometimes I think he forgets that the two are only about 12 inches apart. Senator Chambers says that the Bible is really a book of fairy tales and phony doctrine. That Jesus was and is a lunatic because he said he was God. That there is no God. That hell is a myth. And that heaven is a dreamy, imaginary place for the unintelligent who call themselves Christians. And so, because of some of these thoughts that he's expressed, I am rising in stern opposition to AM 399. This amendment to exempt churches makes no sense. Our responsibility as a body is to pass legislation that's good for society. Now, if it's good for society, it's good for the church. And Senator Chambers indicated Jim Cunningham had said that exempting the churches would take his opposition to LB 475 away. I think Mr. Cunningham ought to rethink his position. If the church needs exemption, LB 475 must not be good for the church. And if it isn't good or right in the church, how can it be good and right for society? Good for the society and bad for the church makes no sense. Do we want to approve that kind of legislation? No. What we pass for society should also be what's best for the church. If there's a discrepancy, we should not go forward. I'm opposed to the amendment. I'm opposed to the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carlson. Senator Shimmick.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. So, Senator Carlson, if I'm understanding you right, taking away the amendment would not take away your opposition to the bill. That is the way that I understood what you said. May I ask Senator Carlson?
Senator Carlson, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Taking away the amendment then, if I'm understanding you right, would not take away your opposition to the bill?
No, it wouldn't.
So I'm not certain I understand your argument, because I thought at one point you were giving the church the business for not thinking they should be subject to the rest of society's rules. Is that right?
If I might answer.
Yes, please.
My thought is that we as a body are to pass legislation that's good for society. And if it's good for society, it should be good for the church, so we shouldn't be exempting the church from legislation that we pass.
We do exemptions all the time around here, Senator Carlson. Whether it's a good idea or not, we do exemptions. We exempt property taxes on certain kinds of equipment. We exempt farmland from 100% valuation when we tax property there. I mean, I'm not trying to say we should or shouldn't. It's just a fact of life that we do exemptions around here all the time to make things politically possible, to take away a large segment of the opposition. But what you have said, and I think what a lot of others would say, that it wouldn't make any difference whether we took away this exemption or not, you still wouldn't be supportive.
I've simply expressed that I'm in opposition to the amendment.
Yes, and that's what I thought you meant. Thank you, Senator Carlson. And I also think you said that procreation is the main focus or purpose of sex, and I think that there are a lot of people who can't procreate, who for one reason or another aren't able to have children. And I don't know that you want to say that they shouldn't be having sex necessarily. Am I right, Senator Carlson?
I think you missed the second reason. The other is that we've given that to be used as pleasure in marriage. Okay,
thank you. I appreciate Senator Carlson's comments, and everybody else's here. Everybody is, I think, trying to approach this issue in the manner that they see fit. I might encourage you to think about what other states are doing. As of 2003, there were 10 states that had passed such legislation. I don't have a total update, but I do know that Iowa just passed legislation that would prevent discrimination in employment and in housing and a lot of other areas. And that is now the law over in Iowa. I consider Iowa a sister state. I consider Iowa fairly closely attuned to the thinking of Nebraskans. And I believe this is coming sooner or later. I think it's like a lot of other things. It just takes time. And I would encourage us to not take a lot of time. I think a lot of time has already passed. I remember that Tim Hall
1 minute.
introduced this kind of legislation way back in the 90s, and we've been at it ever since. So maybe we've been at it long enough. I passed out a chart of Nebraska businesses that include orientation in their non-discrimination policy. Again, this is current as of 2003. There probably aren't any businesses that have changed their policy as far as doing away with the policy, and I'm sure there are those that have added to it. But look at the kind of businesses that you have on this list. They're big businesses, they're little businesses, they're Nebraska businesses, they're international businesses, they are churches, they are educational institutions. They are just a wide range of groups that have this kind of orientation. And I think, public schools even, I think that
Senator.
they have seen that this is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schimmick. The following senators are wishing to discuss this item: Senator Chambers, followed by Senator Christensen, Senator Fulton, and Senator Nankus. Senator Chambers.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, it would be hard to compress so much illogical claptrap in 5 minutes as was done by my good friend Senator Carlson. He made illogical leaps from statements that were flawed and invalid in the first place. He should get the transcript, and if he doesn't, I'm going to let him read what he said. And he'll say, gee whiz, did I say that? Now, Senator Carlson says if we enact a law for society, it ought to be good for the church. We tax business property. We don't tax churches. We make people pay automobile tax. We don't make churches pay taxes on their vehicles. So he was just making that statement because he's upset with me, and he said, because of what Senator Chambers has said, and I don't like it, I'm against this amendment, and I'm against the bill. Foolishness. And that's for what Senator Fulton wanted to say. Y'all must not know what bigotry is. When you knowingly and intentionally discriminate against somebody because of what they are, that is bigotry. And if that's what Senator Harms does, if that's what Senator Carlson does, if that's what Senator Fulton does, if that's what the Pope does, it is bigotry. And I don't care who the person is who's going to wear that label. It's his or her conduct that causes the label to fit. And when Senator Fulton's best argument is, well, Senator Harms is against this bill, Senator Carlson's against this bill, and he's against it, therefore everybody ought to be against it. That's why I'm so much different from many of the people in this legislature and in this society. I have a brain. My brain is what I use. Senator Carlson talked about a heart. Since I don't have one, I'm not plagued by what these people who say they speak from their heart are plagued with. Because those who profess to have a heart are the ones who are comfortable in the presence of bigotry. Bigotry is not inconsistent with their philosophical, their moral, and their religious principles. I have not brought a bill to abolish churches, even though I think as a whole they're probably the most worthless operations on the face of the earth. And if you drop them all in the ocean would be the worst for it. And society as a whole would be the better for it, because you, Senator Carlson, are the tabernacle of God, not the church. Good God Almighty. You, Senator Carlson, not the stained glass windows, not the bricks, not the plaster saints, not the doctrines and dogmas of men, Senator Carlson. You're supposed to love everybody, and you demonstrate your love not by what you say, by what you do. I don't know what goes on in Senator Carlson's house, and as he said, and I say, it's none of my affair. But in general, a man can tell a woman, I love you, and he slaps her around, treats her like dirt. A woman can say, I love a man, and put powdered glass in his food, hit him upside the head with a skillet, as happened to George Bush down there in Texas that time when he professed to have gotten choked on a pretzel and slid his face across the rug, and that's how he got that scar. That is known as a Crawford caress, and it's done with a cast iron skillet in the hands of an angry female spouse. Now, some people call that love. That might be tough love, but my view on these things is different. Senator
1 minute.
Fulton talked about the prosperity in homosexual homes, and he doesn't know anything about that from his own experience, and he gave us 1991 figures. But if he knew anything and called it to mind, he'd know that men make more money than women in this society, regardless of their sexual orientation. So if you have a household comprising 2 men, they're going to have more money if they're working than a male and female would have, because both men are going to make more money than a female. Many of them do own their own businesses. And those who will acknowledge what their orientation is, Senator Fulton, because they know there are people like you with your attitude, feel financially secure, and they say, you can't do anything to me. I'll rub it in your face. Yeah, I'm gay. Are you? Is that why you fear me so much? Here's what one of my colleagues said. One of the senators said, they're trying to, gays want to be made a special protected minority. And he said, are we?
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. President, all senators. I guess I have a little concern with 475 from the standpoint of the need of it, because as the discussion earlier has said, if the activities of the bedroom are private, then how is there ever to be a discrimination case against sexuality, homosexuality, or any of it? Think about it. Unless you're flirting, unless you are telling somebody about it, unless you're exhibiting it, then how do they know about it? Why do we need another protected class? It doesn't make sense. If they aren't telling it or sharing it, then how did there become a case? You know, I don't know of any personal discrimination cases, but I'm not saying there hasn't been, but my point is, how did it become an issue unless they talked about it? That they created their own issue by sharing that they were gay or sharing what went on in the bedroom. It doesn't make sense here. I just want you to think about that. Why do you need a protected class? Because if they're not sharing it and making the case, then they wouldn't have a case. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Christensen. Senator Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the body, I wonder if Senator Nankus would yield to a question.
Senator Nankus, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Nankus. Something you said last when we were debating this on Friday, BLGT. Would you consider, for those who don't know, bisexual, lesbian, gay, or transgender? Oh, for the record, that show was Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, so I really butchered that, but that was the show. BLGT, would you consider transgendered persons to be protected under LB 475?
Yes. And I thank you for the question, Senator Fulton, and I don't disagree with some of the points that were brought out from the debate on Friday, and that it may be important to include some form of definition as we move forward on this legislation. It's my understanding, I think Senator Ashford is working on some language, and there may be some other proposals out there as well. And I have my light on, was going to visit in a little bit more depth about some terms as we proceed in this debate, and ensuring that we're all utilizing accurate and informative language as we discuss these issues.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Nankus. I think that's how I would interpret 475 also. Sexual orientation BLGT has become an acronym that's fairly widely used, and I would think that transgendered persons, therefore, would be included within LB 475. That being the case, I'll pose this question to the body. When I was growing up back home, small town, we had there were twin brothers, and they dressed like, well, I guess they would be transvestite. They dressed like women, and I knew them, and we had everyone kind of looked at them a little weird, but they were considered, I guess, harmless, and they were. They never got in any trouble. But if they were to apply for a teaching job, and they never did, but if they were to apply for a teaching job within a public school, I think that would be a question that would be raised. Well, how are you going to dress in front of the children? Now, I don't know if that's considered transgendered, but it would be within the same category, I guess. So if one who is chosen a different gender, one who is transgendered, would be included within LB 475, I'd say that's one instance where it's probably something that can be told or can be discerned or gleaned by one's behavior or by looking. I mean, if it's a man that's dressing like a woman, that would be something that you could see. I think it would be legitimate to say you shouldn't be teaching children in a school. Now, I have to admit I haven't clearly thought through that, but it seems reasonable anyway. And I think that would fall under the purview of LB 475. So I bring that up not to confuse, but to demonstrate that there can be confusion because we don't have terms. Sexual orientation can be wide open. And I will submit to you that when we do start, if we do start to laser in and find definitions to certain types of sexual orientation, there will inevitably be those of a certain sexual orientation which would be left out. And perhaps that's why, perhaps that is a prudential judgment on the part of Senator Chambers to introduce this legislation such that sexual orientation isn't defined, such that it's inclusive. And if that's the case, then perhaps he'll make that point. Perhaps it's just obvious to others. It's not obvious to me. But regardless, without a definition, there are a lot of possibilities, some of which I think it's reasonable, and I think it would be a responsible action on the part of an employer to ask. If someone comes in, a male who's dressed as a female, asking to teach fourth graders, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask or to say that, no, I'm sorry, you shouldn't be teaching fourth graders. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll put that point out, and it could be refuted. I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Fulton. Next, we have Senator Nenkus, followed by others wishing to speak on AM 399, Senator Carlson, Senator Shimmick, Senator Chambers, Senator Harms, Senator Christensen. Senator Nenkus.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. Senator Fulton, I do need to actually make a correction for the record, and I misspoke earlier in our previous dialogue. And the bill as written, it's my understanding, would not extend protection to transgendered members of our society, instead would apply to gay, lesbian, and bisexual employees. But I did want to talk a little bit this afternoon exactly about those issues and the terminology that we're using as we proceed in this debate, because I think it is important. And words do have meanings and connotations, and some are legal terms of art, which have even greater importance. And I'll be passing around some of this information for members that are interested, but basically I'm relying on an article from January 2004 that was published in the Nebraska Lawyer magazine, which was provided as a tool for education and awareness within the Nebraska Bar in addressing some of these issues in the course of our professional practice, and which I thought may be of use to members of this body as part of this debate and otherwise. But when we talk about, and they have a nice glossary included in here with appropriate language defining sexual orientation, gender identity, heterosexuality, GLBT, homosexuality, bisexuality, lesbian, transgendered, sexual preference, lifestyle, and queer, which are some terms that come up in the course of debating these kinds of issues. And one thing that I wanted to point out that I know has been part of the dialogue amongst various members in this question of definitions has been the inclusion of the word sexual preference. And I wanted to point out for the membership how sexual preference is actually really not a politically correct term to use in debating these issues because of the very connotations that it does imply. And GLBT people don't prefer or choose to be attracted to one gender or another any more than heterosexual people choose to be straight. Even if you disagree with whether or not orientation is immutable or not, this term will signal that you are not accepting if you choose to use it. And this same idea really mirrors some of the comments that Senator Rogert mentioned during the debate on Friday in relation to these issues. And so I just wanted to flag that issue for the membership and to be wary and careful as we move forward and ensure that we really are using appropriate terminology in this regard. And like I said, I'll be happy to have the page send around some of that glossary and information for people, and hopefully they'll find it useful. The other quick point I wanted to make in the debate today in addressing the issue as a whole is earlier this session, I'm sure members, many of you remember, we had a spirited debate on LB 57, which was introduced by Senator Preister, and that I chose as my priority bill for this session. And that was the Fair Share Bill as it applied to membership in labor organizations and changing some of those provisions here in Nebraska. And we heard many passionate speeches on the floor during that debate about protecting Nebraska's right to work law and how important that is. Again, I contend that LB 57 would not in any way endanger that, but I do believe that some of those same principles that many members in this chamber brought forward during those speeches in opposition to that bill can be employed here. If, in fact, we believe that Nebraska should have strong right-to-work laws, that people should have the right to work free of these arbitrary and suspect classifications and instead just be judged on merit and performance of duties as hired to perform, we should be supportive of Amendment 399 and the underlying bill, LB 475. But thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nankus. Senator Carlson.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, if I could, I'd like to address a question to Senator Chambers.
Senator Chambers, would you yield for a question?
Yes.
Senator Chambers, I got to just verify what you said. Did you say that I'm against LB 475 because you're for it?
You said that because of the things I was saying, you are opposed to the amendment and you're opposed to the underlying bill.
Okay, I'd like to make a correction there. My opposition has nothing to do with what you say. Now, I may not agree with what you say, but what you say has nothing to do with me being against this bill or the amendment. And Senator Chambers, however I'm conducting myself, whether it's good or whether it's not good, a lot of what I learned has come from you. I met with you in your office a few days after we started the session, thanking you for something, and you told me right then, you don't have to agree with me. Don't think you have to agree with me. You have every right to stand up and speak and say what you think, and I appreciate that, and you've given me courage to do that, so I thank you for that. I want to comment a little bit about this idea about exemptions. And I talk about I don't think that the church needs to be an exemption, and then we get brought in taxes and other things that are exemptions. I don't think that has anything to do with this. We're talking here about values. We're talking about behavior. We're talking about ethics. And as a body, as we deliberate and we think about bills that relate to values, behavior, and ethics, if those things are good for the general society, they should also be good for the church. And I don't understand the idea of bringing in taxes and tax exempt and so forth. I don't think it has any relationship with this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carlson. Senator Shimmick.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I wish that more people felt like speaking on this issue. I know it's not an easy issue, and I know that sometimes people feel that taking a stand on this issue is not the politically popular thing to do or the politically correct thing to do. But I think it is an issue that can touch so many lives that I wish we were hearing from more than just the 4 or 5 of us who are getting up and talking about this issue. And I see Senator Harms's light is on up there, so we're going to hear from here pretty soon, maybe some others. I think it's important to talk about this issue. Senator Fulton, did I understand you to say that you wondered whether homosexuals should be teachers?
Senator Fulton, would you yield to a question?
No. My question had to do with transgendered people or transvestites being teachers.
And would you ask the same question of somebody who was gay or lesbian?
Well, I wouldn't ask the question. My point was that I wouldn't be able to tell. I'd be able to tell if a man were dressing like a woman, but I wouldn't be able to tell with a homosexual person, I don't think.
Okay. That's fair. I do want to say that over the years, I have known some gay men who have been teachers. In fact, one of them was an English instructor in Hastings, Nebraska years ago. He was fabulous. He was absolutely fabulous. Was he openly gay? No. But did people know that he was? Yes. Did it make any difference in his ability to teach or to interact with students on a very healthy basis? No, it didn't make a bit of difference. And I note again that there are several public schools in this state who have adopted an open policy. Someone else asked the question about how would you know if somebody was gay if they didn't tell you. I think it was Senator Christensen. Well, people don't generally go around saying openly that I'm gay or I'm lesbian or whatever, but there are sometimes certain facts about their life that makes it become known to employers. For instance, if somebody, some man who is gay lives with another man who is gay and their fellow workers know about it, sooner or later that employer may know about it as well. And in fact, we had an incident not that many years ago at a restaurant here in Lincoln where it became known that someone was gay. I don't think because of anything he did overtly, but it just became known. And he was fired, and it caused a firestorm in Lincoln. And in fact, many people chose to boycott that restaurant because of it. So it does happen, and it's not necessarily because somebody goes around proclaiming what their sexual preference is. I don't think most people do that. I did want to just quickly update you. I got some new information about non-discrimination laws in the U.S., and you will notice on the map that you received, there are 19 states that have now passed such laws, and one, Colorado,
1 minute,
has had a law passed by the legislature May 2007, and it is expected to be signed by the governor. In fact, I would guess one way or the other that decision has been made, but I don't know what that decision was. But you'll see that one of our neighbors, 2 of our neighbors have such laws. 4 Midwestern states have such laws. Again, I think that if you look at the movement from 2003 to 2007, 9 or 10 new states have passed laws. So I don't think it's going to be forever until we have accomplished that here in Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, some of the more central kinds of states, both geographically perhaps and politically. So I just ask you.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Chambers.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, strictly speaking, transgendered people are those who have their sex changed surgically, or they might, in some cases, have, but they're called hermaphrodites. This is not a matter of attire. And I'd like to ask Senator Fulton a question.
Senator Fulton, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Fulton, you uttered a redundancy, but that's not my question. You said when you were growing up there were 2 twin brothers. Were there 4? Because twin means 2, correct?
I stand corrected.
Okay, now that's the easy thing. Do you believe that discrimination against a person in employment because he or she is gay or lesbian should be allowed?
Simply because he or she is gay or lesbian?
Yes, that's the only reason. You can't get this job because you're gay. Should that be allowed under the law?
Well, I haven't thought entirely through, but I don't think that one should be discriminated against because of that solely.
Well, that's what this bill is trying to stop. And you should have thought it through with all the discussion we've been doing, but that's all I'll ask because I don't want to be argumentative on that. I'd like to ask Senator Harms a question.
Senator Harms, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Senator Harms, do you believe that under the law a person should be allowable to refuse employment to that person strictly on the basis of him being gay or her being lesbian?
No, and I made that very clear, Senator, with that.
Well, if that's happening, they have no recourse under the law in Nebraska. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am, but I don't think it should be based on their sexual preference.
Do you think that a law should be passed to protect people against discrimination based on that fact alone?
No, I don't. I really believe that my argument has always been that I do not believe that they should be in the same class as race, color, creed, religion. That's what my argument has been, because I think life is a series of choices.
But if they are discriminated against only because they're gay or lesbian, they have no recourse under the law, and that doesn't bother you?
Well, it does bother me, but I don't think that's really true in most cases.
Thank you, Senator Harms. In most cases, it is true. That's what the law is about. That's what we're talking. But see, when I put the question directly to them, they don't want to come forth sounding like the bigot that they must be if they agree that discrimination should be allowed on those bases. That's what this law is about. And to help those squeamish people, Senator Ashford is going to offer an amendment that will define, for those who need it, certain categories of our brothers and sisters who ought to have recourse under the law when they're denied what all of us would take for granted, the right to earn an honest living. If everybody who could employ had the attitude of the people on this floor, these people would not be able to work. Then if they went out and stole, you'd say, see what they are? They're criminals. They ought to have a job, but I'm not going to hire them because I don't want people like that around me. However you sugarcoat it, it comes down to the same thing. You are bigoted when you go along with discrimination against people in employment because of their sexual orientation. There is no other way to phrase it. I am so happy that I don't have any religious dogma or anything that makes me so intolerant. I can speak out on behalf of any person, any group, suffering discrimination or unfair treatment in this society. I don't have to go ask a priest, is it all right for me to take this position? Is it all right for me to ask, do I have to ask the rabbi? Do I have to ask the minister?
1 minute.
No. And I would hope that were I to be situated in a vulnerable position, somebody would come to mind. But I'm going to always be able to defend myself. And I will. But I think those who are not in a position to defend themselves deserve our support. This bill would also prohibit those who hire 15 or more people and are homosexual from discriminating against heterosexuals who may want a job. It cuts both ways, and it cuts all ways. And the level of this discussion is really discouraging People can say whatever they want to. To operate on the level we've been operating on here is worse than what you'd find in an 8th grade class of informed children. Talking about somebody dressing like a woman, that's what we're talking about. If that's all that Senator Fulton can come up with, he's got no argument, but there's something deeper that is motivating him, but he doesn't want to bring it out, but we all know what it is. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Harms.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Senator Chambers, I just want you to understand that I'm not a bigot. I want to make that very clear. And I'm sorry that you want to accuse me of being a bigot. In my entire life, I've never crossed that line. I also want you to understand that you don't own me. And I also want you to understand that I do not appreciate having my values questioned. I don't question yours, and I will never question those. Each of us have our own thoughts and our own beliefs. And I object to being a Christian and being accused of the things you've accused me of. You are a statesman. And when you leave this institution, you will be a legend. And you need to understand that. And I object to the way you've been treating me and anybody else. Now, let me get to the issue of what I'm talking about. I said earlier I believe that life is a series of choices. And it's not my right to be critical of the choice that you make. It's not my right to not want to employ you. I have employed people that have been gay. I have friends that are gay. I have worked with people who are gay. So don't tell me I'm a bigot. Don't tell me I would not step that line. If I thought they were mistreated, I was the first in the line and where I was working to correct that issue. My argument has been this. Whether you like it or you don't, I don't care. It's been the simple fact that I do not believe that they should be placed in the same category as race, color, creed, religion, ancestry, sex, marital status, and national origin. And that's where I'm coming from. It has nothing to do with the individual. I think it would be horrible if they are being discriminated against. But I don't think we need the laws, and I don't think we need to have it in that category. And I just object to that, and I oppose LB 475 for those reasons and those reasons only. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Harms. Senator Christensen, followed by others wishing to speak on AM 399, would be Senator Avery, Senator Nankus, Senator Cruz, and others. Senator Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. President, fellow senators. I guess I'd like to make another point here. Quite often I've been told I got too much common sense for dealing with some of these issues. But why do we need an exemption for the church? Unless this is a special protected class, unlike the others. Example, do we exempt the church from discrimination against race? No. Do we exempt the church for discrimination against color? No. Nor do we for the rest of them, creed, religion, ancestry, sex, age, disability, marital status, national origin, any of them. So why do we need to exempt the church here? Because this is a different class you're trying to set aside. You're trying to create a special class here, which is just simply wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Christensen. Senator Avery.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week I spoke on this issue, and it unleashed a torrent of email. And I can tell you that not all of that email was easy to read. And I'll share some of it with you in a minute. But I've heard it said many times in this debate that homosexuality is a choice. It's a lifestyle one chooses. I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that there are professional organizations that have experts that study these issues, and I know that the American Psychological Association has determined that sexual orientation is not a choice, but it appears very early in one's life without prior sexual experience. 60 Minutes did a report on this not too long ago, in which they followed twins. One, and these are identical twins, male twins. One had a preference for camouflage and wore toys. The other had a preference for dolls and wanted to decorate his room in pastel colors, while the other one wanted his room to look like an army barracks. These kids were not even 2 or 3 years old, and the interviewer asked the mother, "When did you first notice this difference?" And the mother said, "About the age of 18 months. Is that choice? I hardly think so. I think that we have to take a good hard look at what we are as a society. In a modern, diverse society that seeks to be a just society, and we must seek that, to be a just society, it is simply not acceptable to allow discrimination in any form. This bill is not outrageous. This bill is not outlandish. This bill is not doing anything more than giving to a class of people the same kind of rights you and I enjoy. It is limited to discriminatory practices in employment. It actually doesn't even address harassment. Maybe it should. It doesn't address transgendered people. Maybe it should. This is a pretty limited piece of legislation. It does not apply to religious organizations. As I said last week when we first discussed this bill, my concern is based on a constitutional question, partly. It's also part of my personal conscience here. But the constitutional question is, can the government allow discrimination against a group or classification of people based upon who or what they are? I think not. Government cannot do this any more than it can discriminate against people based on race or gender. Our society is based on bedrock principles that have to be preserved. Principles of fairness, tolerance, respect for human dignity, and equal opportunity for all. Not singling out one group of people because you don't like their behavior or you don't like what you think they do, singling them out for discrimination. This bill treats discrimination based on sexual orientation with the same seriousness that is given to race, gender, religion, and disability. So what's so dangerous about that? Extending the same rights to people who may have a different sexual orientation than you and I have is the right thing to do. It is not an endorsement of the person's lifestyle, nor is it an endorsement of their behavior. It is merely a demonstration of the respect for them as fellow citizens.
1 minute.
Already, many of Nebraska's largest employers provide protection against discrimination based on sexual identity. And I can name some of those companies: University of Nebraska, Omaha, UNL, UNMC, Allegiant Health, Mutual of Omaha, Union Pacific. Let me just share with you some emails I've been getting. Now, I'm not going to read it all, but just to give you an idea of some of the hatred out there that might demonstrate why this is necessary legislation. One writes, "No protection for sodomites" is the title. This is a war. In fact, this piece of legislation only reinforces and justifies in people's minds the need that we are indeed the great Satan of the world. It produces distrust and great animosity of our government in the minds and the hearts of millions around the world, here at home, and is partially responsible for the bloodshed we saw at the World Trade Center.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Nankus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm proud to follow my good friend, Senator Avery, and particularly I'd like to dovetail on some of the comments that he just added to our dialogue. He talked about some of the emails and phone calls and letters that he's received in regards to this issue, as I'm sure all of us have received literally a plethora of correspondence in regards to this issue. And he's right in pointing out the depth of emotion contained therein. To put it quite simply, I've been a fairly strong proponent of this legislation, and my political and personal future has been threatened because of it. However, I will continue to stand on the side of legislation that ensures equal opportunity and an equal playing field for all Nebraskans, particularly in the limited extent as contemplated under LB 475, which is limited to workplace discrimination. My good friend Senator Christensen mentioned in some of his colleagues this afternoon kind of a don't ask, don't tell approach that may subvert the need for legislation like this. And Senator Christensen, I just wanted to point out how at times I don't necessarily disagree with the ideas that you're bringing forth, but for example, I think that sometimes we take for granted the ease and advantage of our heterosexuality. For example, would we ask employees to not put their, heterosexual employees to not put their wedding pictures on their desk at work? But instead you want to ask gay and lesbian couples to maybe not display or overtly display their lifestyle? I think those are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves. And again, I just wanted to make a point today about the limited nature of this legislation that we're discussing. We're not talking about marriage. We're not talking about parenting. We're not talking about inheritance rights. We're not talking about insurance coverage. We're not talking about medical decision-making. We're talking about the right to work and be judged on the merit of your performance for duties you were hired to perform. And that seems to me to be a limited, common-sense approach to dealing with these issues. With that, I'll yield the balance of my time to Senator Chambers.
Senator Chambers, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Nankus. Members of the legislature,